The plasma cannon hummed against Commander Sarah Chen's shoulder as she tracked the Zephyrian Queen through her scope. 30 meters below, Queen Vexara moved through the crystalline cave system with fluid grace, her forearms carrying what appeared to be ceremonial weapons. Sarah's finger rested on the trigger, her breathing steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. 3 months of hunting had led to this moment. The Zephyrian Hive fleet had glassed 2 human colonies before retreating to this remote planet. Intelligence suggested Queen Vexara was gathering resources for another assault. Sarah's orders were simple: eliminate the target, prevent another genocide. The Queen paused near a cluster of luminescent crystals, her chitinous exoskeleton catching the ethereal light. Sarah adjusted her aim, compensating for the slight gravitational variance. One shot would end this war before it could truly begin. Her finger tightened on the trigger. Then she heard it. A soft keening sound echoed through the cavern, barely audible through her helmet's audio pickups. Sarah frowned, scanning the area around the Queen. Movement caught her eye. Small, dark shapes clinging to the Queen's lower torso. Not weapons, not armor. Children. 4 Zephyrian larvae, their carapaces still soft and translucent, nestled against their mother's body. The keening sound came from them, a distress call that made Sarah's chest tighten with unexpected recognition. She'd heard similar sounds in the ruins of New Geneva, human children crying for parents who would never answer. The Queen's head turned upward, compound eyes scanning the cave ceiling with predatory precision. She'd sensed the threat. Sarah had perhaps seconds before the alien monarch located her position. The smart play was to take the shot now, eliminate the primary target while she still had surprise. Instead, Sarah found herself hesitating. The largest larva, barely the size of a human toddler, reached up with tiny arms toward its mother's face. The Queen's mandibles clicked softly as she nuzzled the child with surprising gentleness. The gesture was so familiar, so universally maternal, that Sarah felt her worldview tilting on its axis. The Queen's head snapped toward Sarah's position. Their eyes met across 30 meters of crystalline cavern. Queen Vexara's compound gaze held no fear, only a fierce protective determination that Sarah recognized in her own reflection whenever she thought about Earth's children. Sarah's finger froze on the trigger. The Queen moved with lightning speed, her forearm sweeping her offspring behind a massive crystal formation while her body remained exposed, a living shield between her children and the human sniper. She could have used them as cover, could have positioned them to make Sarah's shot impossible. Instead, she protected them at the cost of her own safety. The ethical calculation crashed through Sarah's mind like a runaway freight train. This wasn't a monster directing fleets against human worlds. This was a mother, protecting her young with the same desperate love that drove human parents to impossible acts of courage. But Earth's colonies were still ash. 200,000 human lives lost to Zephyrian plasma fire. The weight of those deaths pressed against Sarah's conscience as she struggled with the trigger. Queen Vexara remained motionless, a perfect target. She could have fled deeper into the caves, used her superior knowledge of the terrain to escape. Instead, she stood defiant, ready to die if it meant buying her children time to run. Sarah's training screamed at her to complete the mission. Every tactical manual, every strategic doctrine demanded she pull the trigger. The Queen was responsible for humanity's losses, whether directly or through the command structure she represented. This was war, and war had no room for sentiment. Yet something deeper than training held her back. In the Queen's protective stance, Sarah saw her own mother shielding her from a plasma bombardment on Kepler 42b. The memory was sharp and painful, the moment she'd understood what love truly meant. The larvae's keening grew quieter, as if they sensed their mother's resolve. The Queen's mandibles moved in what might have been a prayer or a lullaby, soft clicks that carried across the cavern with heartbreaking clarity. Sarah's breathing slowed further as she made her choice. Her finger eased off the trigger, though she kept the Queen in her sights. This moment would define not just her career, but her humanity. The easy path led to completing her mission, securing her reputation, advancing the war effort. The harder path led into unknown territory. Queen Vexara's head tilted slightly, as if she sensed the change in threat level. Her compound eyes remained fixed on Sarah's position, but her posture shifted almost imperceptibly. Still protective, but no longer resigned to death, Sarah activated her helmet's external speaker, knowing the universal translator would convert her words into something the Queen could understand. What she was about to do violated every protocol in the book, but some decisions transcended military doctrine. The future of 2 species hung in the balance, suspended between a human's conscience and an alien mother's love. Sarah's voice echoed through the crystalline cavern, carrying words that would change everything. "We need to talk. Queen Vexara's antennae twitched with surprise. She hadn't expected mercy from a human soldier, hadn't expected anything beyond the swift death that military efficiency demanded. Her forearms remained positioned protectively around her offspring, but her compound eyes focused intently on the human's position. "You have me at disadvantage, human warrior." The queen's voice resonated through the cavern, her species' natural harmonics creating an almost musical quality even when filtered through translation software. "Why do you hesitate? Your people call us monsters. Your media broadcasts our image as demons who consume worlds." Sarah descended slowly from her perch, her rifle lowered but ready. Each step down the crystalline formations sent small echoes through the cavern. "Maybe because I've seen real monsters, and they don't usually risk their lives for their children." The queen's mandibles clicked in what Sarah's xenobiology training suggested might be confusion or amusement. "Your intelligence files are comprehensive, human. You know what I have done, what my forces have accomplished in this sector." New Geneva. Kepler Station, the research facility on Titan's moon. "I know what the reports say." Sarah reached the cavern floor, still maintaining a respectful distance. "But reports don't explain why you're here, alone with your children, instead of commanding your fleet." "Perhaps I am gathering resources for another assault." Sarah gestured toward the crystalline formations around them. "These are memory crystals, aren't they? Your species stores historical data in them. You're not planning an attack. You're preserving something." The queen's silence stretched for long moments. Her children peered around her carapace, their large eyes reflecting the cavern's bioluminescent glow. The smallest one chittered softly, and the queen's lower right arm stroked its head with surprising tenderness. "Your species learns quickly," Queen Vexara finally admitted. "Yes, these crystals contain our history, our culture, the songs we sing to our young, the stories that define who we are beyond conquest and expansion." Sarah's grip tightened on her rifle. "Then why attack us? Why destroy colonies full of families, children, people who never threatened you? Because we are dying." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She'd expected justifications about territory or resources, not this raw admission of desperation. Queen Vexara's compound eyes dimmed slightly. "Our home system is failing. Solar radiation increases each cycle, sterilizing our breeding grounds. We have perhaps 20 standard years before our species faces extinction. We needed worlds quickly before our population collapsed beyond recovery. So you chose genocide over diplomacy. Diplomacy is a luxury for species with time." The queen's voice carried notes of anguish that transcended translation barriers. "Your governments would have debated for decades while my people died. Military action was our only path to survival." Sarah studied the alien monarch, noting the stress fractures in her exoskeleton, the way her movements suggested exhaustion beyond mere physical fatigue. "But you're not with your fleet now. You're here, preserving culture instead of conquering territory, because I realized conquest without identity is meaningless survival." Queen Vexara gestured toward the memory crystals with her upper arms. "What purpose is there in saving our bodies if we lose our souls? If my children inherit only violence and the fear of others, what have we truly preserved?" One of the larvae chittered more insistently, and the queen lifted it with practiced ease, cradling the young Zephyrian against her chest. The gesture was so naturally maternal that Sarah felt her emotional barriers cracking. "The attacks have stopped," Sarah observed. Your fleet's been radio silent for 3 weeks. I ordered them to withdraw to minimum safe distance from your colonies. We are reassessing our approach." The queen's antennae drooped slightly, "Though I suspect your governments view this as preparation for a more devastating assault." "They do." Sarah lowered her rifle completely, though she remained alert. "That's why I'm here. Earth Command believes you're the key to Zephyrian aggression. Remove you, end the threat." A logical assessment. Queen Vexara set her child down gently, all forearms moving to keep her offspring close. "I am indeed the final authority for our military actions. My death would create succession chaos that would fragment our remaining forces. But it wouldn't solve the underlying problem." Sarah felt herself stepping into dangerous territory, thinking beyond her mission parameters. Your people would still be dying. Someone else would eventually reach the same desperate conclusions you did. Perhaps. Though likely with less restraint than I have shown. The casual admission sent chills down Sarah's spine. Less restraint? I targeted remote colonies, military installations, research facilities. structures primarily with minimal civilian casualties when possible. Others in my government advocated for more direct approaches, biological weapons, atmospheric poisoning, complete planetary sterilization. Sarah's blood ran cold as she processed the implications. The attacks they'd considered genocidal were actually the moderate option within Zephyrian military doctrine. Queen Vexara seemed to read her expression. You begin to understand the complexity of your situation, human warrior. Killing me may satisfy your desire for vengeance, but it will likely condemn both our species to a far worse conflict. The largest larva approached Sarah cautiously, its movements curious rather than fearful. Sarah remained perfectly still as tiny arms reached toward her weapon with the innocent exploration of any child encountering something new. Cathal, return, the queen commanded gently. The larva obeyed immediately, but continued watching Sarah with fascination. He's never seen a human before, Sarah realized. None of them have. Their knowledge of your species comes from military briefings and propaganda images. To them, you are as alien and mysterious as we are to your people. Sarah knelt slowly, bringing herself closer to the larva's eye level. What do they think of me? The queen tilted her head, compound eyes studying Sarah's face. Cathal finds you interesting. Your bilateral symmetry is unusual to him, but your protective posture when he approached was familiar. He recognizes the stance of a warrior parent. I don't have children, but you fight for them nonetheless. The simple observation carried profound weight. Sarah found herself seeing the situation through new eyes, recognizing patterns of protection and desperation that transcended species boundaries. What happens now? Sarah asked. I can't just pretend I never found you. My superiors expect results. Queen Vexara's mandibles moved in what might have been a smile if her species possessed such expressions. That depends entirely on what kind of results you wish to report, Commander Sarah Chen of Earth's Colonial Defense Force. Sarah started at hearing her name and rank. How do you know who you are? Your identification is embedded in your equipment's electromagnetic signature. But more than that, I know your reputation. The ghost of Kepler Station. The human who held off 3 Zephyrian assault ships long enough for civilian evacuation. You saved 1,600 lives that day. The memory brought no pride, only the weight of those who hadn't made it to the evacuation ships. I was doing my job. As was I when I ordered that attack. The Queen's voice carried genuine regret. Perhaps that is where we might find common ground, Commander. 2 soldiers tired of being weapons in someone else's war? Sarah felt the weight of decision pressing down on her. Her mission demanded the Queen's death, but her instincts suggested that might be exactly the wrong solution. She thought of Earth's children, of human colonies struggling to rebuild, of the xenophobia that had only grown stronger after each Zephyrian attack. Then she thought of the larvae clinging to their mother's carapace, innocent of their species' crimes, but doomed to inherit the consequences. There might be another way, Sarah said slowly, the words forming as she spoke them, but it would require trust from both sides, and sacrifices that neither of our species is prepared to make. Queen Vexara's compound eyes gleamed with what might have been hope. Speak your thoughts, Commander. Perhaps desperate times call for desperate solutions. Sarah activated her communication array, knowing this conversation would likely end her military career but might save 2 civilizations. First, I need to know something. If there was another option, a real alternative to conquest, would you take it? The Queen looked down at her children, then back at Sarah. Commander, if you could offer my people survival without requiring the blood of yours, I would surrender my crown and spend my remaining years in whatever prison you deemed appropriate. That's not what I'm asking for. Then what are you asking? Sarah took a breath that felt like stepping off a cliff. I'm asking if you're willing to help me convince 2 species that their worst enemy might be their only hope for survival. The cavern fell silent except for the soft crystalline chimes created by air movement through the formations. Queen Vexara's mandibles moved soundlessly, processing concepts that challenged everything both species believed about each other. You speak of alliance, the Queen said finally, between humans and Zephyrians. I speak of survival. Sarah gestured toward the memory crystals surrounding them. You're preserving your culture because you understand that existence without identity is meaningless. Humans are facing the same choice. We can continue this war until one species destroys the other, or we can find a solution that preserves both. The logistics alone would be staggering. My people require atmospheric conditions that are toxic to humans. Our biochemistry, our social structures, even our concepts of individual identity are fundamentally different. but not incompatible. Sarah had studied enough xenobiology to understand the basics. Zephyrians are hive-minded but still maintain individual consciousness. Humans are individualistic but capable of collective action. Different approaches to the same underlying need for community and purpose. Queen Vexara lifted her smallest larva, holding the young Zephyrian close to her chest. You would ask both species to overcome millions of years of evolutionary psychology. To trust beings that appear monstrous to them, that think in ways they cannot fully comprehend. I'm asking them to choose between understanding and extinction. Sarah's voice carried conviction that surprised even her. Because those are the only real options left. Your superiors would never approve such a proposal. My superiors aren't here. You are. I am. And right now, we're the only ones who can make this choice. Sarah activated her long-range communicator. But you're right that neither side will accept this easily. That's why we need to give them something more compelling than ideology. Queen Vexara's antennae twitched with interest. What did you have in mind? Proof that cooperation benefits both species more than conflict does. Sarah began entering coordinates into her communication device. You mentioned that your home system is dying due to solar radiation. Human technology includes radiation shielding that might extend your world's habitability. In return, Zephyrian biotechnology could help us develop sustainable colonies on previously uninhabitable worlds. Exchange of technologies. The Queen's compound eyes brightened. Addressing both species' survival needs through mutual benefit rather than competition for resources. Exactly. But first, we need to demonstrate that such cooperation is possible. Sarah finished entering the coordinates and looked directly at the Queen. I'm going to contact Earth Command and tell them I've captured you alive, that you've requested diplomatic asylum in exchange for strategic intelligence about Zephyrian capabilities and intentions. Queen Vexara was silent for several moments, processing the implications. You would risk your career, your reputation, perhaps your freedom on the possibility that our species can overcome their mutual hatred. I'm risking everything on the certainty that if we don't try, both our species will face extinction within my lifetime. Sarah's finger hovered over the transmission control. The question is whether you're willing to risk everything on the same possibility. The Queen looked at her children, their large eyes reflecting trust and innocence. She thought of the thousands of Zephyrians still aboard the fleet ships, waiting for orders that would determine their future. She considered the human colonies that would burn if the war continued, the civilians who would die for crimes they'd never committed. There are protocols, she said slowly. Procedures for diplomatic contact that my government established centuries ago but never expected to use. If I formally request sanctuary under human law, my fleet commanders are bound to honor a temporary ceasefire while negotiations proceed. How temporary? Standard diplomatic protocols allow for 90 solar days of discussion before military options are reconsidered. Queen Vexara's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. Sufficient time to explore possibilities, but not so long that either side could claim the other was stalling for strategic advantage. Sarah felt her heart racing as the plan took shape. 90 days to convince two species to abandon warfare for cooperation, to overcome fear and prejudice and evolutionary instinct. She paused, then smiled grimly. I've had worse odds. As have I. The Queen gently set her larva down with its siblings. But there is one condition, Commander. If this fails, if our governments ultimately choose continued warfare, I want your word that you will complete your original mission. What? If we cannot achieve peace, then my death remains the optimal outcome for both species. A quick end to Zephyrian aggression, rather than the prolonged devastation that other leaders would bring. Queen Vexara's voice carried absolute resolve. Promise me that you will not allow sentiment to override strategic necessity. Sarah stared at the alien queen, understanding that she was being asked to commit to murdering someone she was beginning to respect. But she also understood the brutal logic behind the request. I promise, she said quietly. If this fails, I'll finish what I came here to do. Queen Vexara's compound eyes seemed to smile. Then let us ensure it does not fail, Commander. Contact your superiors. Tell them the Queen of the Zephyrian Empire formally requests diplomatic sanctuary and is prepared to provide intelligence that will change the course of this war. Sarah's finger pressed the transmission button, sending an encrypted message that would reach Earth Command within hours. Whatever happened next would determine whether two species learned to coexist or continued their march toward mutual destruction. The larvae clustered around their mother's feet, chittering softly as they sensed the tension in the air. The smallest one looked up at Sarah with curious eyes, completely unaware that its fate now depended on the wisdom of two warriors who had chosen talking over killing. "What do we tell them?" Sarah asked, gesturing toward the young Zephyrians. "The truth," Queen Vexera replied, "that their future will be different than their past, and that sometimes the greatest courage lies not in fighting your enemies, but in learning to understand them." The crystalline cavern around them seemed to pulse with bioluminescent approval, as if the ancient memory crystals recognized the historic nature of the moment. Two species stood at the precipice of either unprecedented cooperation or final war, and everything depended on whether fear could be transformed into hope. In the distance, Sarah's communication device chimed with an incoming transmission from Earth Command. The response had arrived faster than expected, which meant either very good news or very bad news. She looked at Queen Vexera, who nodded with regal composure. "Whatever they say," the Queen murmured, "we face it together." Sarah activated the communication link, preparing to hear humanity's response to the most important diplomatic overture in galactic history. The words that came through would determine whether her children, human and Zephyrian alike, inherited a universe of infinite possibility or endless war. The transmission crackled to life, carrying with it the weight of two species' futures. Earth Command's response echoed through the crystalline cavern with military precision. "Commander Chen, confirm your status and the nature of your prisoner immediately. Admiral Morrison is inbound with Fleet Task Force 7, ETA 18 hours. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Fleet Task Force 7 meant orbital bombardment platforms, atmospheric fighters, and enough firepower to sterilize the entire planet. Admiral Morrison was known for his efficient solutions to alien threats. "They're not coming to negotiate," Sarah whispered, then activated her transmitter. "Command, this is Chen. I have Queen Vexera in custody. She's requesting formal diplomatic asylum under Article 12 of the Colonial Defense Charter." Static filled the transmission for nearly a minute before Morrison's gravelly voice cut through. "Commander, Article 12 hasn't been invoked in 40 years. It requires verification of genuine strategic intelligence and good faith intent. What exactly has the target offered?" Sarah looked at Queen Vexera, who nodded slowly. They both understood that the next few words would determine everything. "Admiral, the Queen has information about Zephyrian defensive capabilities, fleet positions, and most critically, why the attacks began. Sir, there are circumstances here that could change the entire trajectory of this conflict." "Explain." "The Zephyrian Empire is facing species extinction due to environmental collapse. Their aggression stems from desperation, not expansionist ideology. Queen Vexera has ordered her fleet to maintain minimum safe distance from human colonies while diplomatic options are explored." Another long pause. Sarah could picture Morrison's weathered face processing information that challenged everything Earth's military leadership believed about their enemy. "Chen, are you telling me this war started because the bugs are homeless?" "I'm telling you it started because a dying civilization chose violence over the slower death of diplomatic delays. But there might be alternatives that benefit both species." "Such as?" Sarah glanced at Queen Vexera, who stepped closer to the communication device. "Admiral Morrison," the Queen's harmonious voice filled the cavern, "I am Vexera, First Queen of the Zephyrian Empire. I formally invoke diplomatic sanctuary under your Colonial Defense Charter. In exchange, I offer complete intelligence regarding Zephyrian capabilities, strategic plans, and technological resources that could benefit human expansion into previously uninhabitable systems." The silence stretched for so long that Sarah wondered if the connection had failed. When Morrison's voice returned, it carried a weight that spoke of decisions being made at the highest levels of human government. "Your Majesty, I'm going to ask you something directly, and I expect a direct answer. Are you surrendering?" "I am proposing an alternative to mutual destruction, Admiral. Zephyrian biotechnology could terraform worlds that current human science cannot colonize. Human radiation shielding could extend the habitability of Zephyrian home systems. We offer technological exchange rather than territorial conquest." "And if we refuse?" Queen Vexara's mandibles clicked softly. "Then within 20 standard years, my species faces extinction and yours faces the desperate fury of beings with nothing left to lose. The next Zephyrian leader may choose biological weapons over measured military action." Sarah heard muffled conversations on the other end of the transmission, Admiral Morrison conferring with staff officers and probably direct communication with Earth's leadership. The Queen waited with regal patience while her larvae chittered softly around her feet. Finally, Morrison's voice returned. "Your Majesty, I'm authorized to offer temporary sanctuary while both governments evaluate your proposal, but there are conditions. State them. First, you accompany Commander Chen to neutral territory, the research station at Kepler Junction. Second, your fleet maintains current positions without advancing toward human space. Third, you provide detailed intelligence about Zephyrian military capabilities as a demonstration of good faith. Acceptable. Queen Vexara looked at her children, her compound eyes dimming slightly. However, I have 4 dependent offspring who require specialized care. They must accompany me. Understood. Commander Chen, you're to escort the Queen and her dependents to Kepler Junction immediately. Transport arrives in 6 hours. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. They'd achieved the first step, but the real challenge lay ahead. Admiral, what about the Fleet Task Force? We'll maintain position as orbital security during the transfer. Chen, I want to be absolutely clear about something. You're personally responsible for the Queen's security and compliance. If this goes sideways, if this turns out to be an elaborate trap, the consequences fall on your shoulders. Understood, sir. And Chen? Good work. This is either the stupidest thing any officer has ever done, or the smartest. We'll know which in about 90 days. The transmission ended, leaving Sarah and Queen Vexara alone in the crystalline cavern. The silence felt different now, charged with possibility rather than imminent violence. Your Admiral Morrison is cautious, the Queen observed. A useful trait in a military leader. He's also practical. If this works, he'll take credit for supporting innovative diplomacy. If it fails, I'll take blame for exceeding my authority. Sarah secured her weapon and activated her equipment for extraction. Are you certain about bringing your children? Kepler Junction isn't exactly child-friendly. Separation would be more traumatic for them than adaptation to human environments. Zephyrian larvae are remarkably resilient. Queen Vexara gathered her offspring with her 4 arms, settling them into carrying positions that suggested long practice. Besides, their presence may help humanize us to your people. It is difficult to view beings as monsters when you see them caring for their young. Sarah nodded, understanding the psychological strategy. She activated her beacon for extraction pickup, then hesitated. Your Majesty, what happens to your authority if this fails? I mean, if our governments reject the alliance proposal? If I am perceived as having shown weakness or compromise, my successor will likely be chosen from the war faction. They believe salvation lies in complete victory rather than coexistence. The Queen's voice carried grim certainty. Your species would face biological warfare, atmospheric poisoning, perhaps even attempt at complete planetary sterilization. And if you're seen as having been coerced or manipulated by humans? The same outcome, with the additional element of revenge for my capture. Queen Vexara adjusted one of her larvae, whose large eyes had fixed on Sarah with continued fascination. This path requires success, Commander. There is no acceptable failure scenario. The weight of responsibility settled over Sarah like a physical burden. 2 civilizations' survival depended on her ability to convince suspicious governments to abandon war for unprecedented cooperation. She thought of the human colonies still rebuilding from Zephyrian attacks, the xenophobic sentiment growing stronger with each casualty report. Then she looked at the Queen's children, innocent of their species' crimes, but doomed to inherit the consequences. How do we sell this? Sarah asked. How do we convince humans that Zephyrians can be trusted, and convince your people that humans won't exploit their desperation? By demonstrating that cooperation produces better results than conflict. The Queen shifted her smallest larva to a more comfortable position. The first step is proving that we can work together effectively. If we can establish a successful collaboration at Kepler Junction, it becomes a model for larger cooperation, a proof of concept. Precisely. Your scientists and mine, working together on problems that benefit both species. Human radiation shielding combined with Zephyrian biotechnology could create habitable environments that neither species could achieve alone. Sarah's communication device chimed with an incoming priority message. She activated the display and frowned at the contents. Transportation to Kepler Junction has been delayed, mechanical issues with the diplomatic transport. Queen Vexara's antennae twitched with what might have been amusement. Or perhaps someone in your government is having second thoughts about hosting Zephyrian visitors. Either way, we're stuck here for at least another 12 hours. Sarah looked around the crystalline cavern, noting the memory crystals that contained Zephyrian cultural history. Maybe that's not entirely bad? This gives us time to prepare for what comes next. What did you have in mind? Sarah activated her recording equipment. If we're going to convince both species that cooperation is possible, we need evidence. Documentation of successful collaboration between human and Zephyrian individuals. She gestured toward the memory crystals. You're preserving your culture here. What if we could do something that demonstrates how human and Zephyrian knowledge complement each other? The Queen's compound eyes brightened with interest. The memory crystals require specific harmonic frequencies to access their data. Frequencies that Zephyrian vocal cords produce naturally, but which human technology cannot easily replicate. But human audio equipment could record and amplify those frequencies, making the data accessible to both species. Exactly. And human digital storage could create permanent backups of information that would otherwise be lost if these crystals are damaged. Queen Vexara moved toward the nearest cluster of memory crystals, her children following with curious excitement. This could be our first collaborative project, Commander, preserving Zephyrian cultural heritage using human technology. Sarah felt a surge of excitement as the plan took shape. And documenting the process would show both governments that our species can work together productively. It's perfect. As they began setting up equipment, Sarah realized that something fundamental had shifted. She was no longer a human soldier guarding an alien prisoner. She was a partner in humanity's first attempt at genuine interspecies cooperation. The future remained uncertain, but for the first time since the war began, it felt possible that her children and the Queen's might inherit a universe where difference meant opportunity rather than danger. The work began, two warriors choosing creation over destruction, building bridges across the vast space between species.